Ladies and gentlemen, independent Americans around the country and around the world, the holidays are in full swing. The politics is nonstop, and especially the national security, veterans, and intelligence stuff is at the forefront. So before you go on holiday break, before you check out, we have a very special guest, a man I've wanted to get on the show for a very, very long time, a legend in journalism, and especially in the veterans journalism world. The great and powerful Leo Shane is finally on Independent Americans. Welcome, sir.
Thank you for the invite. I snuck downstairs in the Capitol here, so I'm a little overdressed for the podcast, but I think we'll push through.
You look very sharp for an Eagles fan.
So I was gonna bring my big scarf on, but I said no. I'll wait till the second appearance. I'll be nice because
Well,
you're
we
suffering.
got lots to talk about. I want to talk about Saquon and Soto and Army Navy, but before that, I want to talk Hegseth and Collins and maybe some NDAA and what's happening in Washington. But why have you not been on the show before? I've had this show for 5 years. Why haven't you been on sooner? I take full responsibility, but look,
it's because I avoided your calls for years when you were doing veterans advocacy. So clearly, I just kept it up when you switched over to the podcast. So I don't know, maybe because it's been quiet. There's been no major scandals for VA in the last few years. This has actually been surprising to me, and credit to the Biden administration. VA hasn't been on fire recently, and that's unusual.
Let's talk about
for VA.
that too. Let's talk about that too, because that's kind of what McDonough was put in there to do, is to make sure there were no fires and keep it quiet and out of the news, right? And maybe, but let's go through all of it. And I set the stage a bit in the intro, but I think it's really important. Number one, I'm really grateful to have you on the show. And there's never been a better time to have you on than right now for the first time. But you are, without a doubt, the most respected guy in this space. For as long as I've been doing it, 20 years, you've been on the veterans beat and the intersection of national security and intelligence. You know this stuff. And there were a lot of times when nobody else was covering VA and you were single-handedly covering it. So I think you're really the perfect guest to have on, given all of it. You're also probably the guy who knows Hegseth better than me, right? I mean, those of us in the veteran space, we know Pete Hegseth. We've been working with him, against him, alongside him for me, it's been almost 15 years, I think. But you've been covering him when he was at Vets for Freedom, when he was at Veterans for Common Sense. He's a force in the space because of his platform on Fox. So let's start there if we can. I mean, on a very, very macro level, what do you make of the Hegseth nomination? You've seen every nomination in recent time for both VA and DOD. Can you talk about kind of the historical context and how unusual a pick like this might be relative to others?
Yeah, well, first off, thank you very much for the compliments. It's a very nice way of saying that I'm getting very old and that I've been hanging around for a long time. So, and you're right. I have known Pete Hegseth for quite some time. Not saying that we hang out and have drinks or anything, but he has been around. It was not a surprise for me to see that he was going to have a role in this administration. You knew that he had close ties to Trump. You knew that he was going to find some position there. It is shocking to me to see that he got nominated for Secretary of Defense. I mean, this is not just a position that you have to be vetted for, but probably one of the positions you have to be the most vetted for. This is one that, really gets a lot of extra scrutiny, gets a lot of extra attention, and is the largest agency in the government. So to take someone who hasn't had any experience in that, and that's not to downplay any of his military background or what he's done leading these other organizations, but there's nothing like running the Pentagon out there. And to have someone who really has none of that background, to put them in charge, and to put them in charge with some of the stuff we knew, whether or not you believe everything that's coming out. He's refuted a lot of these allegations, but I think everyone who's known him for a while knew that he was the kind of person who was going to have a lot of skeletons in the closet that he was going to have to talk about. And that's the kind of person that might end up as a chief of staff, might up in some non-confirmed thing. It's a position where really that you don't have to go through some of this public scrutiny on the same level, and you're not going and talking to senators about your private life, talking about your past affairs, talking about things like this. So by the same token, I've tried to learn not to be shocked by anything that the Trump administration does, that Donald Trump does. I mean, we lived through this for 4 years. He announces appointments in the middle of the night. He seems to pick people based on how he's feeling on a given day. That's not to say they're totally unqualified or totally qualified. It just isn't anything that is predictable at this point.
Mm.
So that's been the real thing. All the stuff that we've heard about Pete and his qualifications, why Trump wants him in there. You can have folks who are out of the mainstream. You can have folks that don't have this, but do still have some relevant experience. Do still have some better background with large organizations. I mean, look, Trump has put a bunch of businessmen into key military positions for nominations now. It makes sense with his background, makes sense with what he's selling, but it feels like the kind of thing where a traditional Republican would have taken, a general who's off the beaten path, or at least someone
Right.
who's a colonel, somebody who's got that background to get in there. So that's, on top of all of the allegations that have come out, on top of all the fights we've seen, that's been the biggest surprise for me with this nomination.
Yeah, and he has no relationships in the Pentagon, right? Like usually you've got someone who served in one of the branches or is, it's been a member of the Senate, right? I mean, so this is kind of, in my view, it's like a political Hail Mary for Trump, or he's feeling himself and he wants to push the pace and he's like, I'm taking a big shot. I'm going for the biggest spot in the federal government with the biggest shot I can, the biggest reach, right? In terms of experience, in terms of potential exposure or disqualification. But there's another side of this too that you've seen. He's very good at this fight thing, right? And he's kind of built for this new media moment because, even right before we got ready to tape, he's tangling with ProPublica, who, apparently reached out to confirm whether or not he had gone to West Point. He provided documentation, or was accepted to West Point. He provided documentation and said, I went to West Point, and ProPublica is the left-wing ProPublica is, trying to smear me. And they come back and say, no, we're reporting. But I think I want you to react to that. But the bigger issue is that Hegseth is a known quantity in the space because he's really been an instrument of the Trump administration and the right wing on Fox News on these issues, but more so on VA issues, right? I mean, he was, you and I were talking 4 years ago because he was rumored to be a VA secretary nominee. He ultimately went with Ronnie Jackson, and then he went with Shulkin, and then he went with Wilkie. But every time people would say, well, what about Hegseth? And usually the reaction was, well, he's been pretty public about his messy personal life, and he probably won't want to be vetted. So he's going to be chief of staff. He's going to be press secretary. But can you talk about, I think especially folks on the left are dismissing him, but he's very effective in terms of pushing a message and being a political instrument for a cause and for an agenda. So can you talk about that element of this?
Yeah, look, I mean, it's interesting because he may be better suited for the confirmation battle than for the job itself, right? Like he is good to go out there. He's good to have these fights. He's good to say the people, the Democrats are blocking the president's will, and this is the liberal media is going after President Trump again. They won't let him get his people in there. But the question is, if he does, if he does catch this car, well, what's he going to do with it? How does he run the organization? What actual policies do we get? And I think that's going to be interesting because we've heard a little bit about some of this stuff. We've heard about the women in combat issue. We've heard about some of the getting rid of woke, but we actually don't know what his major policies are going to be. How is he going to increase lethality? That's what he said. He wants to increase lethality. So what does that mean? Does that mean getting rid of more folks? Does that mean additional trainings? Does that mean plussed up budgets? We don't have a lot of those details. What we do have is the fight right now. So I think at this point it's pretty clear he'll at least make it to the confirmation hearings, and that wasn't clear 2 weeks ago or 3 weeks ago. A lot of back and forth, a lot of fights. We've heard Senator Ernst has come out now, and she seems committed, maybe not to voting for him, but at least committed to getting him in front of the Senate Armed Services Committee, getting him into a January hearing where he says stuff, and then who knows? I mean, maybe after that he calms some folks. Maybe all of these meetings he's having, he gets enough. He doesn't need Democrat support. He doesn't need any Democratic lawmakers to back him. He just needs the Republicans to fall in line, and make sure there's not 2 or 3 who defect there and get out of that. So, you mentioned the VA angle, and for as you said, he was rumored in the past to be in the VA. I wouldn't think he would be in the VA mix now. VA is not a big, sexy, popular one to be. People want to be in the Defense Department. People want to be in the other ones. But it's an interesting contrast between him and Doug Collins, the former congressman who was nominated there, because I do think Doug Collins also doesn't have a lot of experience in the VA space. He doesn't have a lot. He wasn't on the Armed Services Committee. He did serve as a chaplain and served in the reserves, is still serving in the reserves, but had a different military experience. But he's someone who held an elected office, so he's been through some of this. He ran for Senate. He ran a congressional office for 7 years. So there is a different level of understanding government, working with government. And I think most of the reaction to him has been, this guy feels like a blank slate. We don't know where he's going to be, but he's got the relevant experience to run a federal bureaucracy. He's got the and can still fit into the Trump level of, we're going to shake it up. We're going to go into other
Well,
things.
to that point too, Leo, I mean, and I
Yeah.
want to, we'll bounce around a little bit. I was really anxious to get your reaction to Collins, and I want to go deeper on that because I think politically he's as, if not more of an extreme pick than Hegseth, because you've got a voting record. You see, he voted against the Defense of Women Act. He's voted against rights for LGBTQ people. He's voted against abortion stuff. So with more clarity where he's actually going to be, which is definitely far right of center relative to the middle. So you've got this kind of 1-2 punch, in my view, of culture warriors who are going to hit the two largest agencies in the federal government, the culture of those two agencies, and also kind of the star power of those two agencies, right? Which Trump has always uniquely understood, that veterans are popular. Veterans are kind of shielded from some of this. And he's done this with nominating Tulsi and nominating Lee Zeldin for EPA. And a lot of these folks, he starts saying, well, he's a veteran. Now, he didn't pick a veteran to run the Navy, but for the most part, it's kind of a casting thing. So let me ask you to go back to Hegseth and ask you what, it looks like Joni Ernst is going to be a key. I've talked about it a lot. She's a combat veteran herself, a sexual assault survivor, but she's also been kind of humbled by the pressure in public from the right wing that says they're going to primary her. She's up for re-election next year. I said she would have been a much more viable candidate herself. That made some people go nuts. But it seems like what the strategy is for her and others is, I'm going to keep my powder dry. And not only are the confirmation hearings going to be critical, but the weeks between now and the confirmation hearings. I feel like any day now, we're going to wake up to a new thing. And he's challenged whistleblowers. He said, come on out. So what's stopping a whistleblower from actually having that courage, or even an ex-wife, right? His mother wrote an email that was published in the New York Times. So what are you hearing on the Hill? And what are you hearing in the Pentagon? Do you feel like there is resistance and people want to stop this? Or they just want to kind of let it play out?
Well, look, within the Pentagon and within a lot of there's a lot of folks who say he's just not qualified. He doesn't have the background. We don't know what he's coming in with. This seems like a TV host who looks good on camera and all of a sudden is going to be in charge of $850 billion worth of operations. So, and that's the concern. That's the panic level is, exactly what does he do? I think if you're someone like Joni Ernst, and again, you could absolutely see her being nominated for this and sailing through, becoming the Secretary of Defense, and still carrying a lot of the same policies that President Trump says he wants to have there. But there's just the level of understanding with her, again, having held elected office, understanding the bureaucracy, putting some work in. I think there'd be a different comfort level with her, a much higher one. But if you're her right now, you're in this awkward position of, you don't want to look like you're sabotaging this guy, so you have a chance at the job. She is a party loyalist. I mean, she's not that. Part of the attacks on her now is, oh, she's a rhino, she's a Republican. That's absolutely insane. This is someone who's been a defender of Trump. She was rumored to be a Trump VP pick, 8 years ago. So it's confounding to see that, but. It's also, for someone like her, you don't want to be reacting to just what the initial rumors are out there. There's no downside for her to have it go all the way to a confirmation hearing, for him to be making this pitch over time to give Trump's nominee the chance to explain his positions and to talk about stuff, and then see if he comes to the confirmation hearing and says something horrible. It's easy for her to say, hey, look, you all saw that. You all saw what he said. If there's whistleblowers who come out, again, it's understandable why they don't want to come out right now, because just about all whistleblowers who tangle with Trump and Trump nominees end up having their personal information put out there and having their lives upended. So, but there may be some who are compelled and say, look, this is just too much. I can't stand back. I've got to get out there and say this. So I think there are a number of Republican senators at this point who are saying, all right, I've got some at least behind the scenes. I've got some reservations. I don't know what to think of this guy, but there's no downside for me to wait a few weeks and to let him keep
Right.
making the pitch, to let the president go out there and then see if the president turns on him. There may be
Right.
some allegation that comes out where Trump's like, "All right, look, even I can't deal with this anymore." I
Right.
don't know what it would be at this point. There's a lot of stuff that's out there, but
Leo, who do you see as the Democratic lead on this? It feels like Tammy Duckworth is going to be the symbolic lead on this. I know Blumenthal has been one of the, but it doesn't feel like they have really figured out who the hell is in charge over there and who's going to lead the counterattack here against Hegseth. So, that being said, do you see anybody emerging and maybe even from outside of politics? I'm curious to see if the Joint Chiefs are going to speak out, if Mullen's going to speak out, if Milley's going to speak out, is Kelly going to have a view on this? Right? Those are people who could potentially influence Susan Collins or Murkowski. And then at the end of the day, do two questions as a part of that too. Do you think are you betting on him to go through or not? And are there any other backups that you're hearing that haven't been mentioned? We've heard Ron DeSantis, we've heard obviously Joni Ernst. Are there other names that you think people should be tracking on if Hegseth does go down?
yeah, I mean, look, on the second question first, on the backups, we've heard Ernst's name, we've heard DeSantis's name. After that, every time I try and give a list of backups, he picks somebody completely off the grid. So I
Right.
would not assume that anyone that you're hearing rumored is actually that close to replacing Hegseth, because I think it depends on what day this happens and how
What
Trump.
about somebody like Brian Mast? He likes the symbolism here. I mean, and Mast has been
I
in
mean,
Congress.
sure, it could be, but he can't take too many more folks out of the house, so that's a
Right.
problem. But also, like, I won't be surprised if it's Brian. I won't be surprised if it's anyone
Right.
because it just, again, I had four pre-writes ready for who the VA secretary nominee was gonna be. Doug Collins wasn't one of them. So,
Yeah.
that is what it is. On the issue of the Democrats, who's gonna lead the charge there, I think at this point, part of this is it looks so bad they don't need to jump in. They don't need to be
Mm,
piling on here. But you
mm,
have heard Tammy Duckworth. You have heard a couple of other folks. I think Tammy Duckworth is a very logical one, especially if we start to get into policy issues of women in combat. What does it mean? Can women serve in combat roles? If this is an area where he's going to attack, you've got a combat vet who lost both of her legs serving in Iraq, standing there saying, "Really? Are you saying that my service wasn't worth it? Are you saying I was a distraction in some way while I was bleeding overseas defending this country?" Like, that's
hmm
that's a very obvious choice for them. I know Senator Reid is supposed to be meeting with Pete Hegseth this week. I don't know if that is him being open, him being polite. If they thought it was interesting, because Hegseth doesn't really need to meet with the Democrats. Democrats aren't relevant here. There's enough Republican votes. If he shores them up, he goes through.
hmm
I think a lot of this will just be driven by, can those Democrats not make the public case against him, but make the private case to their colleagues? Is Tammy Duckworth talking to Joni Ernst on the side and saying, "Are you really going to back this guy? Do you hear what he's
Yeah.
saying about us? Do you hear what he's saying about female
Yeah.
vets? Can we really trust him on sexual assault when he's got all this in his back?" I think those are going to be the most important things, and I don't think a lot of that'll be out in the public. I think there'll be some more, but buckle up, because we're going to be doing this for at least 3 or 4 more weeks. He's going to make it to a confirmation hearing. I'm very confident. After that, man, I'm out of the betting business. Like, I cannot tell anymore who's going to make it through, what's going to matter, what's not. I would have told you that, Trump getting in a scuffle at Arlington Cemetery was the kind of thing that was going to resonate with veterans and really kill them, and it didn't. It just blipped by, and
Right.
nobody seemed to care. So I don't.
I'm
I
glad you mentioned that.
Yeah.
As a part of the, I want to talk about Collins and move over to Collins, who I think is maybe the
Mhm.
least reported and covered nominee in this entire spectrum, right? I mean, the ambassador to Greece and France and all these other things are going to get more focus, have gotten more focus than the nominee for VA secretary. And I think it's important because they also have to do shit, right? And you may have met Zach McElwain along the way as an IAVA leader, and we lost him this week to suicide. And the
Yeah.
IAVA leadership crew is really devastated. We just found out yesterday, and we're in mourning. And Zach was a guy who advocated on the backlog, and that was when everybody was calling for Shinseki to get fired. And he was like Clay Hunt in that he was advocating for suicide, and we've lost him for suicide. So it's a devastating loss, but that's the serious shit they're going to have to tackle, right? So for Doug Collins, who I think it's interesting that he is a chaplain, because it's kind of like the most Trumpiest, like right-wing job you could have in the military, right? Is to be a white guy who's a Baptist minister and a chaplain who opposes equal rights for women and gay people. So he seems to me kind of like a covert radical, right? He's less visible. But can you talk about what do you know? And is he pretty much an automatic unless they find a body under his bed?
Yeah, so in terms of what do I know here, he served in Congress, he ran for the Senate, and we might be done. Like that's
That's it,
like
right?
this is not someone he didn't serve on the Veterans Affairs Committee. He didn't serve on armed services. I remember seeing him in the hallway, but to be honest, I haven't interviewed him that much because he wasn't relevant to what most of what I'm covering. Which is something that I've heard from a lot of veterans advocates that, there's concern that does he really understand VA? Does he understand that everything that's in it? Sure, he is someone who served in the military and has that background, but that doesn't necessarily make you an expert at how disability compensation works or how suicide prevention should work. So by the same token, he did run for Senate. He was in Congress for a while. There doesn't seem to be those same kind of skeletons in his closet because he has been publicly vetted in a bunch of ways. And he did run a congressional office. So there is some optimism, at least, that we're not getting someone who's a complete neophyte when it comes to just understanding how government works and understanding how the process works. Most of the advocates I've talked to, at least privately, are saying, we're willing to give the guy a chance. We don't know him. He's a blank slate, but also he's not somebody who's coming in with an entire agenda that we're worried about. He's not coming in with a specific, a book already written on how to privatize VA. He's not coming in with a handful of sexual assault scandals. That seems like damning with faint praise, but that is something at this point. And I think you're right. Unless something really big comes up, I think we're looking at him sailing through confirmation pretty easily because most of his colleagues, both Democrats and Republicans in the House, say, all right, he's got a strong conservative bent, but I don't remember having any problems with him. I don't remember having personal objections to him.
This is kind of, deep in our space, but, Trump launched the most aggressive privatization effort in modern history of the VA and succeeded in carving off more of the VA for the private sector in his 4 years, I think, than ever before. Biden kind of tries to roll that back. Now you've got Collins in there who's sure to do the same. And it also dovetails off of what was Hegseth's priority as an organization, right, was to push for this privatization. So I think that what I would call the veterans industrial complex is about to hit, high levels. And I would argue, people say, Trump's going to cut the budget. Elon wants to cut the budget. Ramaswamy wants to cut the budget. I've argued that maybe he won't cut the budget. He'll increase it, but he'll just carve off more of it to the private sector than we've ever seen. So I don't know if you can kind of project 2025 and these other things have said they're going to cut veterans benefits, right? They're going to come after veterans benefits. There was a piece last week that said, they have to tackle benefits at the VA if they're going to cut the budget. Do you project that they're really going to do that?
I mean, let me, I just said I don't make predictions, and so let me take that hat off and put it back on a little bit here. I'll believe that someone's going to cut the VA budget when I see them cut the VA budget. You and I have done this for a long time. Everyone says this is going to be the year. We're going to trim that budget. We're going to pull back and everything. And then when push comes to shove, there's no lawmaker up here in Capitol Hill who wants to be the one who cut the VA budget, who said we're actually pulling back on benefits. We're pulling back. So I think, what the DOG committee, the government efficiency committee, it's interesting to see that. It would not surprise me to see them take a hard look, but I think that's going to end up being one of these more like justify where the money's going rather than we're going to cut it. And it is a huge portion, but when you find out that a lot of it's going towards veterans benefits, ain't a lot of popularity in pulling that money back.
And when Elon finds out that he is not a contractor at VA and there's a lot of money to be made there, he can link up with the Marvel comic crew and see the opportunity here. I mean, I've long said that most people in the private sector don't understand how much money there is to be made around the VA.
And I think that's a great point. I think there is going to be a lot more of this push towards pushing the money outside of VA. The community care idea and the idea that, you can pay for private sector. You said that the Biden administration has pulled back on some of those privatization efforts or some of those efforts to do stuff. They really haven't. They've given some good lip service to it, but about, a little bit more than a quarter of all VA medical appointments were outside care before Trump took office. After he left office, it was about 35%. It's up to 40% now. Like the money is still going out there. This community care, this idea of veterans getting care outside of the VA system, it's been going out. Now, there some of that growth has slowed under Biden, but we really haven't seen it pulled back at all. And that's where I think it's going to get really interesting because are you going to get to a point where half of all the medical appointments the VA pays for are outside care? At that point, you're just sort of funneling money through VA. Like you're just really getting
Right.
billions of dollars as a pass through, and is that the most efficient way to do it? And then are you really having conversations about, okay, do we just need to reinvent TRICARE for life for a veterans audience where you can go get whatever you want, but we care for it in some way. And the loss there
Yeah.
is the VA medical network, which, for its warts and flaws, does recognize wounds of war better than the community does. If you go to a community doctor, they're not going to ask you the same questions about PTSD, about burn pit illnesses that someone at the VA is going to because they know it. So, which doesn't
Yeah, they
mean
have the specialty care. I mean, military sexual trauma is maybe a great example of an acute issue, right? That the VA has expertise on, right? Try to go get a prosthetic leg for, a woman in the private sector, right? Versus at the VA, right? Things like that where they have to have expertise. I
And
think
that's the thing. That's the thing the veterans groups are really good. And this is it's what veterans groups get terrified about. If that gets dismantled, where do I go to get my prosthetic adjusted?
right,
Where do I go
right,
if I want veterans peer support on
right.
PTSD?
Yeah.
And that's
Well,
just not
I'm
going to
sure
happen anymore,
Elon would
Bob.
love to invent the next generation of prosthetic legs, and it comes with a Starlink package. But
Right,
in the meantime, let
right.
me ask you this: McDonough is almost done. He's gone 4 years. In my view, he was a very controversial pick because he didn't have a history in the space. He wasn't a veteran himself. It was surprising to me that he was a white man, right? Which also bears noting. Trump, like Biden, is missing an opportunity to make a historic pick at VA or DOD by picking a woman. He did neither of those, right? It was largely thought that if Biden got a second term, he probably would have put a woman at VA, right? There were undersecretaries and others who would have made viable candidates. But McDonough's done 4 years. I think his job was keep it quiet over there, right? Like, don't let us have happen what happened with Shinseki and Obama, where there were problems and headlines. And that's what, McDonough's a fixer, right? He's good at operating a bureaucracy and handling problems. So, I mean, on that level, it seems like he gets a good grade. But how would you grade his overall performance, knowing the VA better than almost anybody and seeing all these VA secretaries? How did he do?
Yeah, and I don't want to be glib because I do think that there's a lot of good things they did, and there are a lot of important improvements. But I think you're right. I think the number one job was make sure there's not a national scandal at VA because we've seen that every 2 or 3 years for the last
Yeah.
several decades. So, and we didn't have one. That doesn't mean the VA is perfect here, but there wasn't a wait time scandal. There hasn't been a sexual harassment scandal like there was in the last one. We didn't have a VA secretary fired. He made it all 4 years. That makes him I believe, the third longest secretary in VA history just because he made it through a whole 4 year term, which is kind of crazy. So I do think that the knock on Secretary Madonna has been that they haven't been as aggressive and as innovative as they could have been, especially given that that this was an area where the president was interested and there were a lot of resources. But by the same token, we did see Congress pass the PACT Act. That's a major expansion of benefits in toxic exposure injuries. We have seen that implemented in a pretty professional fashion here. I mean, more folks have gotten into VA. We've seen the number of folks getting disability benefits go up. We see the number of appointments going up. So, I think as McDonough walks away, he can proudly say, this is a more efficient department than it used to be. This is one that has brought in more veterans and is on a pathway, at least as he leaves, to be better at fulfilling that outreach mission. Now, I have no idea if any of that will be sustainable and will continue into the next administration. You don't have to cut veterans benefits if you just aren't as aggressive about letting veterans know that it's okay to come get them. Veterans will sort of self-select out. Veterans will not know about the benefits they get. And that's been the biggest difference, has been VA saying you're eligible for these benefits, and VA going out and saying, hey, you apply for these because we want to pay you disability benefits. We want to get you health care. And that's been the real shift over the last 2 years. And I think the thing that McDonough and his team should be proudest of is that idea of making VA a more welcoming place in the sense of get in here. Let us talk. Let's have a conversation. Let's make sure that you're getting what you deserve because you earned this. I see that really tailing off as we go away here, at least as we get into the idea of should veterans be guilty about getting their benefits? Should we be
Mm,
thinking about you're getting too much here? That's self-selected. The number of veterans who I
yeah.
talk to who are like, I just don't want to apply because I know there's guys who have it worse. I know there's women who have it worse. Okay, but that doesn't mean that you don't deserve it. That you
Right.
still
Right, right,
deserve
right,
it too.
right. Well, I think, ultimately I've learned to stop grading VA secretaries on a scale, and it's more of a pass fail. Right. And so, like, I won't give McDonough an A, but I'll give him a pass, right? And in part because he's still standing, and that's a low bar we have at VA, but you're better positioned to talk about than anyone.
I think you may be a little harsh there, but we'll
I
come.
am. That's
I will
my
also
job
tell
is
you.
to be harsh. Your job is to be thorough, right?
I will also tell you that I think they've been more transparent than any VA that I've covered in
That's
the
true.
past.
But
They've
again,
had
but
press
again,
conferences, a lot more
but
information,
again,
a lot more
low
data.
bar, right? Like we're
So
happy that they're doing press
it's
conferences, right? Which is
it's not
something we
just
were asking
it's
for
more than just
10
the press
years.
conferences. It is the press requests. It is getting data out there.
It
The
is.
Trump administration, especially under Secretary Wilkie, was great about putting as much data as possible out there. So much so that it was hard to figure out. This
Right, right,
administration has been better at. You asked for this data. Here it is. Here's what
right.
you actually wanted to see. Not here's every number in the world so we can obscure the other thing. So
You're gonna stick around for some extra content for our Patreon members. I thank you for that. I
absolutely.
thank you, Patreon friends and supporters. This is the kind of content you make possible, right? It's not often you get a chance to hear Leo Shane do a deep dive on this stuff, and he is always constricted by a word count or by a quick hit on cable news. But he is really a true professor of all these things, and we're grateful to have you here. Before we wrap up, a couple of quick questions, and I do want to get your thoughts on Saquon and your predictions on Army Navy. You and I both know that December is kind of the Christmas tree time. There's a Christmas tree behind me. If you're
Yeah.
watching on video, check us out on YouTube. If you're not, but that's when a lot of things get thrown into the NDA, right? The end of the year push happens and all kinds of stuff gets thrown in. But there are also these really critical little fights that happen right before Christmas. It's when I think Don't Ask, Don't Tell went through and the GI Bill went through. A lot of stuff was in that kind of final flurry. What's happening right now in Washington that people probably don't know about that they should? Are there any,
Well, so
one or two, three key fights?
NDAA they released the compromise text as I was putting my Christmas tree up. So, I'm still a little bitter about that my Christmas tree has NDAA ornaments on it because I was trying to keep track of everything. Look, this is a giant, just absolutely giant military policy bill. It's not the money side of it, but the money will come. I think I don't know about your audience, but my audience has been following very closely the issue of the military pay raises in there. There is a giant pay raise for junior enlisted troops. So there are a lot of folks who make just under 30,000 in base pay. There's other money they get. They get free health care. They get some housing, but still the money that you actually can take home and have some flexibility with, it's about, less than 30,000 for some of these folks who are 24 years old and they're an E2. They've only been in there for a few years. They're going to see like a $3,000 to $6,000 pay boost next year. And that's a huge deal. That's a lot of just take home money for folks. And right now, there's also a provision in that bill that deals with transgender youth and denying medical care through TRICARE for them. That's going to cause a lot of Democrats to vote against this bill. In 3 months, we're going to be having conversations about how Democrats voted against a major pay raise for young troops. And
Are they going to take I mean, is that what's going to happen? They're
they're
going to
going to
hold
take
the
the
line?
bait. There's absolutely
Yeah.
it's what it is. It's what Speaker Johnson wanted. Actually heard from House Armed Services Chairman Mike Rogers just yesterday saying that he's not happy this transgender provision got in there because they like to show a unified vote on this authorization bill. It's a major thing. You want to hear that no matter what the politics are up here, people are behind the troops. People are looking out for them. But this is a bill. Now, I don't know how many Democrats it'll be. It may just be some
Can
folks
I
like
ask you, Leo, is there,
yeah.
and you know the tactics better than anyone, but as someone who's been on the other side of this, is there an opportunity for somebody to pull a Coburn? Can a Democrat put an anonymous hold or a public hold on this? Can one senator be the Dr. No, we used to call Coburn, right? When he did this on the
Yeah.
Clay Hunt bill. It was this time of year that he single-handedly blocked the Clay Hunt Save Act, right? There have been other holds. Can one Democrat put an anonymous hold on it now and shield the rest of them from being forced to that kind of a situation?
There's some stuff that could happen in the Senate, but again, this is a bill that if they don't pass it, a whole bunch of bonuses, and the military pay raise doesn't go through, and
Yeah.
all these other things that need to be reauthorized
Can
don't
like
happen.
Sherrod Brown or
But even if he
Tester
does
or
that,
somebody
that's
take
going to happen on the Senate side, not on the House side. The House
right?
vote is going to happen first, and there's going to be a bunch of Democrats in the House who just are on the record voting against this again for reasons that make sense to their base, but are
Yeah.
just going to end up looking bad because it get tied into this. So that's how the politics is made. It stinks. I think what ends up happening is in April, there's a whole bunch of folks that get this big pay raise, and maybe they don't care. Maybe they don't care about how the sausage was made. But at least when Trump is coming into office, he's going to have this extra cudgel to say Democrats wouldn't even vote for a pay raise for troops. So these young troops who aren't
He's
making
going to
any money,
literally hand out checks at the 82nd Airborne.
and he could
He's
do,
going to go,
yeah.
here's your
So
pay raise, everybody, and here's your Starlink and your Elon Tesla prosthetic leg, right? I mean,
and
it's going to be.
for a voting group that is already leaning conservative and has traditionally been identified with conservative, not always
Yep.
fairly, but is identified that way, this is just gonna add more to this. So something worth watching, something that's frustrating. Also, there's provision in there to see if folks in the Air Force should be allowed to have beards. So your listeners don't care as much as my guys do, but my guys care a ton about this. They just want to grow facial hair whenever they can. So
Man, if the Air Force let people grow beards, recruiting would go through the roof.
right, I mean these are the
I
kind of
mean, right? I
they're
mean,
stuck on these recruiting questions, and this is the real answer: is just let
I mean,
folks
the
get a
Air Force is
mustache.
already kicking ass in recruiting, so this is just going to be like the icing on the cake. All right, so talking about frustrating, you're a dedicated Eagles fan. I sent
Absolutely.
you a note and said congratulations on Saquon because I love him. I think the Giants screwed this up, and you got an awesome guy who I guess the question is like, should he be MVP? It's the same thing I've been saying to Mets fans. I was like, congratulations on Soto. Enjoy him because he's awesome. It sucks for us, but great for you. So Saquon, he should be the MVP, no?
I'm less happy about the Soto news, to be clear. I would rather not see him 17 times a year against the Phillies, but
Yeah,
I don't know how you're asking me that question. This is no question whatsoever. Who's like Lamar Jackson's doing fine. His team has a
yeah.
worse record. He's failed in a couple of leagues. Saquon's averaging 125 rushing. He's gonna break the single season rushing record against your Giants in the final game of the season, which would be
I know.
just extra painful. How can you not give it to him? How can you not like it's he's
I still love Saquon. I have no hate on Saquon. My kid is really upset because now he has a Saquon Giants jersey and a Soto Yankees jersey, and
yeah.
he's 5 years old, and that's like 2/3 of the jerseys he owns. So he doesn't know what to do. But that's our new normal. Let me ask a good news story that's not getting enough press. Army football,
Yeah.
right? Army's playing Navy this weekend. Army's got one loss, and the only one is to #4 Notre Dame. They got an amazing quarterback, Bryson Daly, that I saw in person with my boys. I think he had 5 touchdowns in the first half. I mean, this is kind of a great story, right? I mean, the Army is good again, right? They haven't been this good since the 50s. And we got Army Navy this weekend, which hopefully should be a great victory for Army. I'm wearing the awesome jersey replica here for Bastogne in the 101st. If you guys haven't seen the uniform reveals, go check that out. I post it every year. But this is another thing. It's like kind of good for recruiting. Trump will be there. Last year, he had Elon there. I probably think Wes Moore is going to be there since it's at his stadium, right? I mean, is this going to be like a total political spectacle? And how awesome is Army and why isn't Bryson Daly at the Heisman ceremony?
Yeah, a lot to unpack there. So I've gotten to cover several of these Army Navy games as a
I
reporter,
know.
and it's a different feel. It's a lot of fun. I am excited that especially in the championship game for Army, they did discover the forward pass again, which is this new thing that they're doing in football games now. So,
Yep. Yep.
but it is look, I hope that it's not overly political. And to be fair, when Trump has gone to these in the past, he is going as president or president-elect. Like this is more about the office. He hasn't like stood up and made a speech. He's there. Like this is part of the pomp and circumstance of the whole thing, right?
But
Like
Biden's probably not going to go, right? So like
so,
Trump will be there and Biden won't be there.
yeah, I mean, maybe I have not heard anything about Biden going. There'll be a couple representatives. There'll be all the Army brass. There'll be all the Navy brass. They'll do the
All the
transfer
people
of the
Trump's
middle.
about to
I think
fire in the purge.
it's less about that and more about the pageantry, more about the nonsense. So
And Hegseth will be there, I'm sure.
I think hopefully it'll be a good game. I went to the Navy Tulane game a couple weeks ago where Navy was still like on the edge of like could they be playing Army in the championship game, and we didn't get to see any Navy touchdowns. We saw a lot of Tulane touchdowns, so it's not necessarily looking too good for them, but it's you know,
But Bryson, this is a serious point. You know, Bryson Daly is I think, you know, his records are through the roof. Put his stats up against anybody. You could argue he's playing against lighter competition, but this kid's special, and he's had an amazing season. I mean, it feels like a slight to the academies, and the academies kind of don't always get enough respect. But this could be a boom for recruiting, and the uniforms and all this shit, I think, is going to help Army recruiting be more competitive. But now they can't pay people under the NIL, right? Like other schools are. So that's going to be a huge gap. But this kid's a great story, like for America, right? And he should be at the downtown athletic club.
So I agree, and he's somebody. But let's tie it back to my actual day job here. So when Trump was in office, we saw him push up a couple of initiatives about allowing guys to get out and to go right to the pros, and to make sure that they don't have to have their service requirement and just sort of go in. Now we're talking NIL and everything. Would you be surprised if a year from now Trump is talking about allowing the service academies to have some sort of NIL payment somehow, and saying that we should do this and we should have some sort of, and now all of a sudden Army and Navy are talking about, could we pay something to our players? Would this help with recruiting? I'm
Can
not
you
saying
imagine being a platoon leader rolling into your unit with $10 million in your bank? And like, I mean, that would be, hey, look, conflict of interest is no longer a thing. So anything is possible.
It would
Leo
be,
Shane,
I could see it. I could just see
Leo
all of
Shane,
it.
I'm
Yeah,
so grateful that you're finally on the show. You're going to stick around for some extra content. So
absolutely.
Patreon members, you're getting that exclusively. But for everyone else, now you see why everyone has so much respect and admiration for Leo Shane. You have been tireless. You have been dedicated. I think you are a true patriot. You exemplify the best of journalism, my friend. Nobody works harder, and you've had such a profound impact on our space, and you've changed and saved many lives through your coverage. And we all very much appreciate you and salute you. So thank you for all you do. I hope that Saquon does well for you, but you don't win the Super Bowl, and that you get to go to Army Navy and sit in Elon's booth and see Army victorious.
Well, listen, you are too kind. It has been a pleasure for me to be able to cover the veterans community. It has just been a community that has embraced me and has always offered its story. So I'm happy to keep doing this as long as folks will keep talking to me.
Well, go Army, beat Navy, go Leo, and happy holidays.
Go Eagles, and go Eagles.
I can't go that far. Happy holidays, and stay vigilant, my friend.